X-Men The Last Stand has a reputation for being one of the worst superhero movie sequels in history. While the original X-Men is looked as boring in hindsight, it did lay a foundation for the rest of the films. X-Men 2 was seen as a step in the right direction, especially in the action department, and X-Men 3 is said to have good action but absolutely abysmal plotting, which is a shame because it honestly has the best premise of the entire trilogy. While mutants in the original and the sequel were focused on the paranoia surrounding the concept, the movie focuses on the idea of curing mutants. Such an interesting conflict can arise from this. As Beast notes, it's not cowardly to want to be cured of being a mutant when Storm is a goddess who controls the weather and Beast sheds. Then there are people like Rogue who can kill people with a touch. A lot of nuance can be given to this subject. But no, we had to splice the Cure storyline and the Phoenix storyline together and create a poisoned cocktail. Now let's dig into X-Men The Last Stand. We opened 20 years ago. This movie came out in 2006 and takes place in the not too distant future. Both Charles and Eric visit Jean. First class continuity aside, we do run into our first issue after this. Immediately after the scene, we get yet another flashback. Now, this can work, but given the film it's in, it's more symbolic about how they're running parallel storylines. This kid right here is Warren Worthington III. He is cutting off his own wings in the bathroom because he didn't want to be revealed to be a mutant. This is a very strong introduction that requires an equally strong payoff. Warren either loathes himself to the point that he wants to cut off his wings and deal with the physical pain, or he fears what others will do to him and thus thinks the physical pain of tearing off his own wings is a good trade-off. That's powerful. Too bad we don't get much payoff for it. Then we get the Danger Room sequence in this film, finally. Sure, we don't get a Cerebro sequence, but I guess it's a good trade-off. Rogue is mad because she still can't be intimate with her boyfriend. He's not Gambit, this is Iceman in these films. And seeing him get close to Kitty Pryde only makes things worse. Rogue flat out says Bobby is a guy and his mind is only on one thing. Ugh. Rogue is a prime candidate for the Cure storyline. With a single touch, she can kill you and wipe your memories. The only time she can touch people she loves is when she's cradling their corpse. Why isn't she the main character of this film? The conflict over whether or not to take the cure is basically tailor-made for her. Speaking of main characters who really should be main characters but aren't main characters, let's talk to Cyclops. Cyclops is having a hard time coping with Jean's death. I don't see Cyclops just moping around in his room. I personally would have had his appearance moved up to the Danger Room sequence and say that he built the Danger Room as a coping mechanism. What? If the professor didn't build the Danger Room, then Cyclops built it, because in his grief he became obsessed with strength and control to the point that he created an environment that could be simulated and controlled, just so that he could feel like he had control. So when Jean finally returns as the Phoenix, he would be dealing with a person who has actual control over the environment and not just simulations. That would be horrifying. Scott LARPs as a god, but the Phoenix is a god. Then we cut to Beast. Gotta say, casting Kelsey Grammer as Beast is iconic. I don't think I really read his dialogue in the comics as anyone else except Kelsey Grammer. I am so glad they brought him back for the Marvels, even if it was a cameo. Even the detail of tucking his tie into his shirt while he's reading upside down, that's something I could easily see Beast doing. I'm glad the mutant cure is advertised less as wiping out mutants and more like a means of helping mutants. Even the devil comes disguised as an angel of light. But is the cure really a devil in the disguise of an angel of light? Because mutants aren't a monolith. I'm sad we don't explore the possibility of internal division among mutants. Rogue can kill everyone she touches. But Beast can function normally in human society other than shedding everywhere in public. Yet, what does society think about him? Would the public accept a blue furball as a high-ranking government official? Would mutants who can pass as regular humans feel comfortable with a mutant who looks like this? Would there be some kind of resentment going on between the mutants who can pass but have powers that actively harm them and the people they love, and those who don't pass yet can function normally and can sort of fit in with society despite looking abnormal? Hell, what about later life mutations? So many interesting questions happen. And to give credit, some of them are. Beast even calls out Storm for her sentiments. And it's not like any of these questions aren't asked by the X-Men. Several of the cartoons did address this. But no, this movie won't because we need to deal with other things like the Phoenix. Scott discovers Jean is alive at Alkali. Now, how this played out in the comics was way more romantic than how it plays out in the film. Whenever she did this in the comics, it was a unique form of intimacy that only Jean and Cyclops could do. She could suppress the concussive force blast in his eyes to the point that they could look at each other, not through a visor that filters out his powers, but through their own eyes. Here, she does it, she makes out with him, then kills him because James Marsden had to leave. So in this interpretation, the Phoenix is a dual personality within Jean. While fans are disappointed it's not a cosmic force of fire and life incarnate, that was a later development. Jean's Phoenix powers were her fullest potential. That's why Jim Shooter was so insistent on just killing her off after she destroyed the Dabari, because she did that. She not a cosmic firebird. And B, it was the tone of the trilogy, so it would be really bad if we introduced cosmic forces within this film. I think it's a bit late in the trilogy to do that. It's not like this trilogy wasn't building towards it, since Jean's use of Cerebro in the original X-Men probably awakened the Phoenix, which slowly began taking her over. But back to the cure stuff, the boy from before, Angel, refuses to take the cure and ends up freeing himself. Young Warren had like a minute of screen time. Adult Warren had like a minute of screen time. Movie. You can't expect us to feel much for this character when you only have an admittedly very strong introduction. Meanwhile, Magneto goes to break Mystique out and several other mutants. I do like how he betrays Mystique after she gets cured. I do like that it does show how devoted Magneto is to the cause to the point that he subtly exerts the same bigotry towards humans as what humans did to mutants. The more I watched this film, the more the Cure storyline was clearly the studio's priority. The Phoenix stuff was just a footnote. Anyways, the Phoenix stuff. Jean leaves the mansion for her home. Magneto meets them there. It goes about as well as you'd expect. Why are we at Jean's childhood home again? Flashbacks? Childhood elaboration? No? Fight scenes? Fight scenes. Charles is dead. Iceman flirts with Kitty Pryde. Rogue watches. We'll get into this controversy later. We have to deal with the Phoenix now. Stupidly. Time for the climax where Magneto lifts a bridge to Alcatraz. As a kid, I wondered why he didn't just throw the bridge at Alcatraz. Even if Leech's powers did prevent him from getting close, I'm sure he can't cancel out, gravity and momentum. As an adult, it seems quite odd that he would A, attack later after moving the bridge because it was like daylight at the time, and B, attack Alcatraz. That's where the source of the cure is, true, but I'm sure Magneto would want to head towards the guy who authorized its mass production and the use of darts like the president, in DC. But hey, climax! I'll give credit to this, the action's actually great. It loses points for the I'm the Juggernaut bitch line. Oh, and Angel shows up to save his dad, who got thrown off a building by Magneto's forces. That brings us to, 3 minutes of screen time for this character? Magneto is stabbed with the cure. Then Jean decides to atomize everything. Then she gets killed by Logan because his healing factor would let him approach her. At the end of this movie, Rogue takes the cure. This is a terrible movie. It's not like Shyamalan's After Earth, where it's just a bad movie through and through. No, X-Men The Last Stand is a bad movie, and it has merit to it, and that's what makes it painful to watch. The strongest storyline in this film is flat out the cure. Is it cowardly to take the cure and escape persecution? Should you change, or society change? Hell, how would society change? There's also the question of whether or not you can have a democracy with the cure around, only for the president to turn it around and say, how can you have a democracy when you have actors like Magneto or Charles Xavier who can enslave cities with their minds, either through physical coercion or through telepathy? And really, Magneto just took control of the Golden Gate Bridge with ease. It's not hard imagining him lifting a city out of the ground and holding them hostage. This movie talks big game and fails to do anything of substance for it. I mean, on the front of the poster, it's Logan. He really has no investment in the Cure storyline, whereas with the Phoenix storyline, he's known Jean Grey for like a week and somehow he acts like Cyclops with her. Uh, what? But then let's talk about Rogue. Rogue's storyline is about feeling jealous at Bobby for flirting with Kitty, seeing the Cure, sees him flirt with Kitty, leave to find the Cure and take it, actually takes the Cure, and there's an alternate ending of her not taking the Cure, which honestly says a lot about how much production actually thought about this story arc. Honestly, I'm annoyed because it comes off as Rogue changing herself for a boy, despite saying otherwise. Yeah, when you spend most of your screen time jealous at Kitty Pryde and Bobby, forgive me for saying that, oh, this has nothing to do with the Cure bit, means nothing. Seriously, she has so little presence that she comes off as utterly vapid. Seriously, Rogue, why aren't you protagonist of this film? The Cure storyline is probably the most relevant to you. You can do more than come off as a hormonal teenager who makes short-sighted decisions based off of a boy she likes. Then we have to talk about the Phoenix. I know James Marsden left, but come on. Way more could have been done with Jean alone. And while I absolutely hated Dark Phoenix, I can at least say that felt like it did more for Jean, even though I do not like the creative choices they went with. Can't say that about this movie. We get one flashback at her in the beginning, we get a fight in her childhood home, she is reduced to staring people down, and then dying to Wolverine. That's it. Speaking of Logan, let's talk about Logan. I like Wolverine, but he really shouldn't have been the protagonist of this movie. What emotional attachment does he have to either plotline? The original X-Men had his emotional attachment to Rogue because Wolverine needs a sidekick, whereas the second film had William Stryker as the guy who gave him his adamantium skeleton and probably knows something about his past. This movie, that's dubious at best. This movie tried to pigeonhole him into the role of Cyclops as Jean's love, which really makes no sense since their relationship is nowhere near as developed as this movie acts like it is. Meanwhile, the Cure storyline really should have used Rogue as the focus character and not, well, anyone else. The depth of involvement Logan has is helping Beast stab Magneto with some Cure darts. This movie had a lot of interesting ideas and a lot of interesting action pieces, but at the same time, they don't connect to each other, and you don't get paid to construct parts of movies, just as engineers aren't paid to construct parts of bridges. Those are my thoughts. Please consider liking, subscribing, tipping the channel on Ko-fi. This is Cyril signing off.